Hello. So nice to see you, all of you here, and having these wonderful guests with me. And first things first also, we have a translator with us. Zahra, maybe you want to show yourself. Because we have a French-speaking person with us, Macron. I will introduce him in a second. So you will hear the translation of what he's saying into English by Zahra. And yeah, as Jamila started to point towards the topic of today's panel, we will speak of a possible Muslim futurism movement in Europe. Sounds big, but we dare to dream, we dare to be delusional. And this is today also one of the main topics that we will discuss. We will also center the meanings of sensuality in interrupting futuring practices and what all of that even means. Like, we will start with how do we define Muslim futurism in our works, in the French context, and the Dutch context, and the German context, for example, and also with regards to the project Muslim Futures. And I'm Wasima, and more than honored to have Sarah with us, Sarah Bulgiran from the Netherlands. She's a PhD student in Islamic Studies at Leiden University, and she's mainly interested in processes of knowledge production and meaning making in Islam, in particular in terms of how both are used in ethical, social imaginaries and conceptualizations. And next to her is Anya Saleh. She's an interdisciplinary artist, cultural advisor, curator, poet, and writer, educated in political and social sciences. And Anya Saleh's research and art focus on forms of archives, the colonial continuities within remembering and the politics of memory. And she's also a futurist of the Muslim Futures Project since 2022. And last but not least, Macron Fofana is a futuristic artist, writer, and the Minister of Magic in charge of the banlieue du Turfu. He dedicates his work to the realization of concrete utopia. And what all of that means, we will discuss now. So a warm welcome to you again. Thanks for being here, for traveling to Berlin, for having this discussion today. And maybe I'd like to bring everyone to the stage towards us. Why? Let's start with the question of how do you define the meanings of Muslim futurisms, futures thinking for your work? How is that being materialized in your work? And I would love to start with you, Sarah, especially with regards to the community-centered work that you're doing. I think you can just...
Yeah, it's on? Yeah. Okay. So I've really entered this coming first and foremost from the praxis, which I will actually end this question with, because starting off, how I would define Muslim futurism is very much both a field of study, but also a movement in which you can see Muslims, young Muslims in particular, using theories, theologies, philosophies of liberation, social justice, and ethics to imagine alternative futures. And within this process, I'm particularly interested in intellectual and imaginative processes of creation, of thinking about the ways in which these things can be eventually realized. I would then define the following 3 points as key within this. First would be that it is very much a social imaginary. It's very much about the coalescing of several individuals coming together to exchange views, have dialogues about what it precisely means to celebrate and think about processes of an alternative future. Then I would argue that it's very much an aesthetic, because it's such a figurative movement as well. Art is crucial within it, so is literature. I think literature is actually one of the most important points. As Thomas Bauer argued, it is very interesting how little attention has been attributed to the ways in which Muslims have expressed themselves through literature and art when it comes to contemporary Islamic studies. And then the last point is I would argue that it's also a form of social commentary. And I would argue that because I think that the notion of double critique is very important here, because it's about young Muslims that are very much that are very much not really keen on their works being hijacked by nationalist political agendas, particularly like from Western or imperialist notions, but at the same time are also very critical of patriarchal, racist, or any other kind of oppressive structures within their own societies, so including within Muslim or societies themselves. So that is what I would be particularly interested in and what I see in my work. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And then to connect that towards your work with Banlieue du Turfu and the practicalities when you worked with youngsters in the suburbs, how then, like, and connecting it to Afrofuturism, how does that get together and how is that being materialized in your work?
Bonjour à toutes et à tous.
Hello, everyone.
Comme il a été indiqué, je viens de France.
How it was said, I'm from
Et
France.
je ne travaille pas directement sur le muslim futurisme, mais sur les futurs des banlieues dans le monde.
And I actually don't work in specifically on Islam, but my projects have the background of Islam, and I'm working on suburbs, French suburbs, where there is a huge Muslim community.
Et le turfu est le verlan du mot futur.
When I speak about turfu, it's actually the reverse of the word future. So turfu is future.
Parce que
means future.
j'avais envie de dire à mes amis, vous avez une place dans le futur.
Because I wanted to say to my friends, you have a place in future.
Et donc, une partie de ma communauté est musulmane.
And this is the reason why a part of my community is Muslim.
Mais vous savez ce que j'ai découvert?
But do you actually know what I found out?
Il n'est pas si évident d'impliquer sa culture et sa religion dans le futur.
But it is not that normal seen implicating one's religion and culture in the future, actually.
Et donc, des fois, dans les ateliers, je suis obligé de forcer les participants à intégrer d'eux-mêmes dans le futur.
And this is why in workshops I need to really force my participants in thinking about other cultures and future and religions.
Okay, I see. So also with going in with the openness and letting that being happen in the context with youngsters, it's beautiful. We will get back to also the context of Banlieue du Turfu in a second. Oh, you wanted to add something? Oui. Also for you, Anya, before we get to the next question, because you also as an artist, you work with the notions of futures, but also of memories. Can you tell us how you connect that in your visions of a Muslim futurism, a vision of Muslim futures?
Yes. Oh, can you? Yeah, no. So in my artistic practice, memory plays a really central role because whatever we build on and who we even think of ourselves and who we are is like completely built on memory. And for me, it's really important to take these memories and like deconstruct them. Like, who have we learned our memories from? Whose memory are we identifying with? Because everything that I am, basically, I was told I am. I don't have proof of most of the facts that are in my biography. So that is one part. Like everything of the memory that we were taught is our memory, and everything that we think we remember, because we'll get to that at a later point. Everything that we think that we remember needs to kind of be deconstructed, and like some things need to be left where they are in the past, and some things we have to deconstruct, rethink, add facts to it, and then like take with us to the future. That is a very big part of my practice. Currently I'm working with installations, with textiles as a form of tactile memory and as a form of a heritage craft that has gotten forgotten, but like that is also like a really huge part of a culture, a cultural past, but also a cultural future. I work with the poetry and language, which makes Makans like artistic approach, an approach to using a slang word for a future in his project extremely interesting to me, because the way we see language shapes our realities, and if we feel like that our languages have a place in the future, we can actually start imagining the future. This connects to pigeonization and movements within civil society, or like cultural movements as well. That become really relevant, and it's not only the things that we talk about in academia or write about in academia. In the past years, I was allowed to work with young, mainly like Muslim majority communities in Germany, once in Stuttgart and once in Berlin, in different projects, and it's actually fascinating to learn so much from these young people. And when I say young, I mean from 9 years to 30. Like there were people my age and way younger. How they ask questions, why they ask questions, how they see the world as it currently is, what their experiences are, and how far they dare to dream or think or imagine, because it's oftentimes limited by what they're taught that they're allowed to dream or imagine. And my approach is that we have to break these kind of barriers and make our normal in our homes or in our thoughts the normal for everyone, like that these identities or realities or existences do not have to be discussed anymore, and we can actually dream without these barriers of all the layers that we're taught are not right with us.
Let me jump right there, because you said dare to dream. And when we started the project Muslim Futures, it was also with this question, okay, so there are artists meeting and then they just like sit in a room and dream, like what is going on there? Or how does that materialize? Like it sounds so abstract, like Wasima, like explain, like what is that? And we talked about it, to imagine the unimaginable, which is a quote by Macron. Why is it so hard? And why is it so important to do that? Like when you also think of your practices. And why maybe is it also connected to privilege? And
do you want me to answer
you can jump into it and then we go. Yeah.
Just because it would have like been my next point in my approach is like that even our dreams are colonized and our futures are colonized already. We want everything that people have right now. We want everything that is like relevant under a capitalist society, but a Muslim future for me is not centering capitalism, it's centering humans and their culture and the richness of what they have created, completely like loosened from capitalism and a capitalist system and all the isms that come with a capitalist system. So that is number one for me. Like, it's very, very hard to dream beyond what you've been told is the thing you're supposed to be achieving, right? And I'll stop right here because I know you two have a lot to say too.
Do you want to jump?
Yeah, so I very much approach this question from a Islamic philosophical point of view, because I think it's very important to delve into the aspect of what is precisely Islamic or Muslim about this, because there is a lot. There's a lot of thought, there's a lot of things out there that do not reach the European shores quite often due to issues in translations. And so one of the thinkers that I center my work a lot around on is the Moroccan philosopher Abdurrahman Taha, who is currently perceived to be the most important thinker in the entire Islamic world, being read in madrasas from Kenya to Istanbul to Indonesia, yet it is astonishing how little his thought is being engaged with right now. And so what Abdurrahman Taha writes about imagining alternative futures or imagining alternative realities is to very much look into the Turath, so the Islamic legacy or the Islamic tradition, which centers the concept of ethics, akhlaq. And this is a really important tenet, right? When you start thinking about imagining the unimaginable, there needs to be a starting point somewhere. And for him, it would be ethics. Now, what he means with that, or how he centers that, is the following. There's this idea philosophically that there is a covenant between God and humans. Humans have been entrusted by the Creator to be acting as guardians or stewards of this earth and thus of their fellow human beings. Now, this is both a burden and a privilege as well. And so the question that then arises from this is that if we are to protect God's creation, so protect the planet, protect fellow humans, that there very much is the idea of how to then do this. The question should be not how or why should I be moral or why should I be ethical in this process, but how should I be moral? And then where the challenge lies, I think, is who decides that? Who precisely decides how to be moral, how to be ethical, and who are the ones that are very much capitalizing or hijacking the dominant visions on what this Islamic ethical future looks like right now. And I'm sure there's many ideas that we can all think of when we think about who are the loudest right now in articulating visions of an Islamic future. So that is, I think, where I would end it. Yeah.
It's beautiful. And then I would jump towards what you said, especially with the philosophic perspectives to that. But like, because the quote is from you, Macron, to imagine the unimaginable, could you share with us some anecdotes, some examples also from the work that you've done in the context of Banlieue de Turfu?
Certains disent qu'en mangeant des champignons, on peut imaginer l'inimaginable.
People say that while eating mushrooms, you can imagine the unimaginable.
C'est pas si compliqué que ça.
It's not this complicated, actually.
Mais pour vous donner un autre exemple,
But to give you another example,
selon vous, est-ce que quelqu'un au Moyen-Âge aurait pu inventer le iPhone?
but do you think that in the like decades ago, someone could create an iPhone in the Middle Age?
Peut-être, non.
Maybe, no, yes.
Bon, est-ce que vous pourrez créer la prochaine chose? Si je vous demande là tout de suite de m'imaginer quelque chose qui va avoir lieu dans 1000 ans, 2000 ans, pensez-vous être capable de le faire?
If I tell you an example, an idea of something that could be realizable in 2,000 years, and I say, do it now, do you think that it's possible to realize the thing and create it right now or not?
Bon, là, ça a l'air très perché,
No.
mais maintenant, je vais donner un exemple très concret.
Now I'm gonna let me tell you an example.
Le tchéboudienne est un plat typique africain.
The chevoujen is a typical African meal.
Mais pour l'instant, j'ai jamais vu de tchéboudienne dans un film sur le futur.
But now it never happened that I've seen this food in a film about the future.
Et avez-vous vu votre dessert favori dans le futur?
Have you seen your favorite dessert in the future?
Peut-être que oui, peut-être que non.
Maybe
Parce
yes,
que
maybe not.
le futur est un espace déjà plein d'images,
Because the future is actually a space with plenty of images.
Maintenant, moi, je suis un jeune de quartier qui habite autour de Paris.
For me, for example, I am a young guy who is living in a suburb of Paris.
J'écoute du rap.
I listen to rap.
J'aime le foot.
I love football.
Bref, je suis un garçon très classique.
I'm a classic boy.
Il y a plein de gens comme moi à Paris, en France.
And there are plenty of guys like me in Paris.
Nous pensons que pour réussir, nous devons absolument quitter le quartier pour aller habiter sur les Champs-Élysées.
For us, in order to be successful, we think that we need to go to the center of Paris, to the Champs-Élysées, in order to be successful.
C'est le succès pour un homme noir francophone.
This is the success for a black French man.
Maintenant, si je demande à mes amis, peut-on un jour réussir sans quitter le quartier? Si je demande à mes amis, peut-on réussir sans quitter le quartier? Est-ce possible un jour?
And if I ask my friends if it's even possible to be successful without leaving this suburb,
Ils vont dire non.
They are going to say no.
C'est inimaginable.
This is unimaginable.
We had the discussion, it's so interesting when when we talked about constructing then the futures images and also the imaginaries of possible alternative futures with the youngsters in the banlieue du Tofu, that then banlieues are still being imagined, or the banlieues have to exist, the possible futures, to imagine them in the nows. You remember that discussion that we had?
Oui, please. Oui. Can you ask the question, please, again?
Me?
Oui.
Also, it reminds me of the discussion that we had when regards to when imagining with youngsters from the banlieues that the banlieues still play a role in the futures. And that is nothing good, nothing bad, it's just a matter of fact. When they imagine, or maybe when you said like they need to get out of the banlieues to the Champs-Élysées to get rid of the imaginations of the banlieues and the futures. No,
Oui, j'ai dit que, en fait, pour l'instant, aujourd'hui, les jeunes n'arrivent pas à imaginer réussir autrement qu'en quittant le quartier.
Yes, so this is what I wanted to say. So the younger people, young generation can't be successful. They can't imagine being successful without going out of the suburb.
Mais moi, mon travail, durant les workshops, c'est de leur faire imaginer d'autres possibilités.
But my work in the workshops that I do is to give them this opportunity to imagine actually being successful without even leaving the suburb.
Mais chaque année, 100 albums de rap, il y a 100 albums de rap qui sortiront et qui diront le contraire. Il faut sortir.
Nevertheless, every year there are hundreds of rap songs that don't say this. They say you need to go out in order to have success.
5 films sur Netflix
5 films on Netflix
vont montrer qu'il faut sortir pour réussir.
gonna show that you need to go out. You need to go out in order to succeed.
Et en plus, nous pensons que nous devons faire des documentaires. Nous devons montrer la réalité plus que inventer la réalité.
This is the reason why we believe that we need to show reality, to create documentary films in order to show reality so they can imagine, and at first showing the reality first.
Thank you. That's so interesting because it shows also how much not the pasts, we touched upon the importance of memories and of the memory to the memory, right, Anya? And then pasts, presents, how they are so much connected and important for envisioning futures. And now maybe when we think of the practical sides to it, because we today also ask questions on these empowering approaches to then creatively imagining positive futures, alternative futures, desirable futures. There are so many adjectives you can use for that. How concretely is that being materialized? How concretely that can look like? And also when we think of, there is a whole tradition of futures thinking already, which is very much white and male dominated still. And then like actually we intervene, right? We interrupt that with the practices that we're doing. How can we make sure that it's then also fruitful for the communities that we try to serve for example? Or how do you have examples, anecdotes of how this can be, successful, like Macron shared already? And I look at you, Sarah, with the Dutch context.
I think within the Dutch context, it's very small, but very much resurging right now across the country, still very much in, I would say, offline, intimate, personal settings, because the people that I study and the ways in which I engage with Muslim futurism is very much more so in terms of spirituality rather than issues of class. Not to say that class is not important, because it is incredibly important in all kinds of discussions, but I'm very much more interested in the ways in which people connect with their religion and how they make sense of it. And so the kind of Muslim futurism that I'm seeing within the Netherlands is, for instance, young Muslims that are finding each other quite often at the margins of their respective communities, people that do not feel comfortable visiting mosques, but then at the same time do very much want to do something with their religion and just don't know yet how to go about it. So they are starting to self-organize in groups across the country. And these are people that come from all different kinds of backgrounds, all different kinds of Islamic sects, which I think is particularly interesting. So you have Sunnis with Shi'as, Ahmadiyas who are being heavily persecuted, black Muslims, Muslims from Indonesia, Turkish, really very much a testament to the global Muslim population, converts as well, Surinamese, Antillean, etc. Ages differ, some are queer, some are not, some are veiled, some are not, and they all gather to think about forms of future Islam. How can they just be religious without having to necessarily fight or conform, because they do not wish to, again, attack others who are more in favor of something mainstream. So, for instance, we had a session very recently, and there's going to be one on Sunday again as well. There's this one particular collective. They're called Yumna Collective. This is the only one that is only for women. And they are gathering 6 times a year in spaces. The one upcoming Sunday is on nature. And so they will meet in the park and think about connections between nature, Islam, self, and healing. And read a lot of poetry and think about ways through which they can engage in prayer through that. And for them, that is a form of future making, because there's so little space to be Muslim in another kind of way. So this is also, I think, an incredibly important development that's not only happening in the Netherlands. Actually, Europe, quite interestingly, is where there's very little of this, or at least very little to be found, compared to Africa, Southeast Asia, and North America, where these communities are quite large and growing and organizing in art collectives and meeting offline and having sometimes hundreds of thousands of followers. So is that a concrete example enough? Yeah. Thank you.
Very much, thank you. Maybe, Anya, you can also spill a bit the tea of the Muslim Futures context with the project that you're part of, that we're doing. And then also to break in with the idea then, or maybe I start differently, to make one point clear again, is that how radical it is in its sense to create spaces in which even dreaming and possibly imagining is possible and is made possible and is safe in a safer context. Like, this is actually super radical for the German context, like to have that and to not fight for the right to exist for a moment, because at the end of the day, it's still fighting and arguing and fighting for rights especially. But we come from there, and also from a homogeneous perspectives on what it means to be Muslim, and also on Muslims in Germany. So when we get from there and connecting it to your artistic practices and also your research towards that topics.
Okay, as you spoke, I had like 5 different stages of answers. Where do I start? Okay, so the German context is interesting in exactly what you just mentioned. I think it's extremely hard to already imagine a Muslim future, or a future from a Muslim perspective, because I think we need to clarify a Muslim future doesn't mean we all have to be Muslims, by the way. Just so you know. You're not in danger, no worries. But like, it means that Muslim perspectives actually have a place in the future. But right now we're actually fighting for our like literally bare existence in this country and in several other countries in the way that we are. Like the hijab ban for teachers was just lifted, is about to be lifted. So this is literally existential. Like we're still talking about how we're allowed to be dressed or not to be dressed. So this is one of the big challenges of how to even get to the imagining stage when you're still fighting to just exist and leave the house without being in danger. So that is one thing, and that doesn't only affect Muslim people, but everyone who is being read as a Muslim person. And that has a lot to do with the ignorance that like exists in Europe, and from a German perspective, or in a German context, is like extremely acute. Like it's a really big problem, to be honest. You wouldn't notice if it doesn't affect you, but there's studies on this that you can easily Google, and it's worse than we think it is sometimes. So that is number one. So it's extremely hard to imagine from that perspective, but what was the rest of the question?
It's super.
Okay, do I just go on like this? But in my practice, so this connects to certain things that also connect to discrimination against people who are read as Muslims, because they are not in fact always Muslim, by the way. So in my practice, I will use a tent making practice that originated in the Fatimid period in Egypt, and that has to do with the cover of the Kaaba in Saudi Arabia, Mecca, and the heritage craft that still lives on in a very different context, that is like being used for all kinds of celebrations, but also for funerals, for public spaces. And that brings to life for me like emotions in the public space, because how are we thinking emotionally sustainable? We always talk about sustainability in the future, but sustainability doesn't only mean we're recycling stuff and thinking about the planet, but like while we're destructing the planet, we're also kind of destroying humans and their mental health, and it kind of goes hand in hand. So are we also thinking about emotional sustainability? That is one thing, but the other thing, or the other things, are the imagery that is going to be on these tapestries or on these textiles. Back in the days, people would imagine colorful greenery in a place where you wouldn't have as much greenery as we have in Europe, for example, or like birds of all kinds, or like whatever they would imagine they would put on these tapestries. I want to work with things like shishas. Or the eye that is like a cultural thing where we say it protects people of evil eye. Why do I want to do that? So when I tell people, oh, on my weekend I was in a shisha bar with my friends, the first thing they do is like look down on us, like, shisha bar, are you serious? Or is that where you want to take me? Is that where you want to have a business meeting? And actually, yes, because this is a safe space for people of color, for so many people of color, and especially young men of color, who don't necessarily always have a place everywhere else in society. People who do not have an academic background, people who do have an academic background. I mean, Wasima and me go there to have like conversations, serious conversations sometimes. This woman just came back from Yale University, so this is like there's layers to this. But then also in 2020, one of like the worst attacks on people of color happened, like targeting shisha cafes. Now put one and one together. These places are essential for our communities. And still, like, people, there's all kinds of like really racist slurs that have to do with shisha cafes and how people are named, and I'm not going to name them right now or like say them right now. But this is why in my future and in the future of the youth I was speaking to and I was working with, shisha cafes do have a space and a place. And until the rest of the country or the rest of the world isn't safe for us, this is going to come with us. And it's like simple things like that. We always think in like flying cars and everything is silver and metal, but like that already is a very colonized version, that we only think of tech and we do not think of humans and their safety and like our emotions or our mental health that already is like suffering with all this tech advancements that we have. Yeah, and that is the approach that I'm incorporating in my research and my artistic practice.
It's so interesting that you talked about the imaginary also of shishas, because in your work it plays also a role. And before we go to these different imaginaries, it's also interesting with the disrupting the like kind of the hegemonic perspective on possible futures, which is already existing, which is also inspired by science fiction and stuff. Super interesting. But then having these. Who imagines flying cars in the future? Maybe raise your hand. It's okay. We all do that, maybe? No? Flying cars? No flying cars? Whatever, like these like I did. Like I did for sure. Very much inspired by the things that I read, science fiction books and stuff like that. Or as you said, very minimalistic, or there are visions of utopias and dystopias, sometimes really much merged and realistic versions of it, and so on and so on. And then there is also this notion of indigenous futuring, where then this would be the most, maybe one of the most horrible imaginaries when thinking of flying cars, when everything you want to do is to protect nature, like, and also to have this environment in the futures. So that's also this part of how futures are colonized already, and who dares to think of these possibilities and who isn't, and then to allow for these spaces and to have heterogeneous views. I just want to bring in one other example from Muslim futures, because it's also, one of the futurists came to me and said, like, it's just even to think of mosques also, and the futures of mosques and my practices as a Muslim person, or to dare to say God in a context and what that means, and speaking of spirituality, you know, also in a secular, like in the context of Berlin and stuff, like this in itself becomes so radical, which is like, oh my, like this shouldn't be that radical. This shouldn't be so, wow, right? But also then to have discussions of, okay, this is my understanding of it, and this is maybe then in another project, it doesn't play any role, you know, but there's so much out there, and to allow for that, by allowing for spaces to think of who we could be, rather than to argue for who we're not. So now I'm getting into my feels and pointing to Macron with regards to the imaginaries of shishas, and maybe also you used Fortnite. So also to combine futuring, practices of futuring with maybe games, with playfulness, with joy. Like how is that important for you, for your work?
Souvent on me demande comment j'ai eu l'idée du turfu, et je réponds que j'étais à la chicha en train de fumer et m'amuser, et j'ai eu l'idée du turfu.
Often people ask me how did you came with this idea of curfew, but it was actually in a shisha bar where I was there and then I had the idea.
Et comment j'ai eu cette idée en fumant, c'est parce que en fait, à la chicha, on discute beaucoup.
And why I had this idea while smoking, it's because in a shisha bar, we discuss a lot, we speak a lot.
Vous inquiétez pas, il y a des chichas avec de la fumée bio.
So no worries, there is also shisha with bio smoke, biological smoke.
So, on a beaucoup de débats politiques, philosophiques.
We have plenty of political debates and philosophical debates also.
J'ai dit, on va faire l'Assemblée nationale française à la chicha.
But we are going to make the National Assembly in the shisha bar.
Ouais,
like,
le prochain président français, on va l'élire à la chicha.
Actually, the next French president, we are going to choose from in the shisha bar.
Pourquoi pas?
Why not, actually? But why not?
Et à partir de cette expérience-là, j'ai essayé d'ajouter du gaming.
And with this experience, I tried to also add the gaming part in it.
Parce que le gaming permet de prototyper des futurs.
Because gaming actually makes it possible for us to prototype the future.
On commence à imaginer.
We start imagining.
Et on joue pour créer le futur.
And we play in order to create the future.
Tada!
And tada! Done.
Wow. That's so interesting because it also centers ideas of pleasure, of joy, of community, and how that could look like, and also to have it in different areas. Do you have because it's also methodologies of actually futuring and methodologies and then methods. Do you have anecdotes maybe on also? I know their podcast is something that it's also like an instrument for you to discuss Muslim futurism in the Netherlands, but maybe also with the communities that you worked with. Yeah.
Well, the podcast, we are mainly not discussing Europe, actually, just because so much is happening outside of Europe. which we mainly focus on. I mean, talking about gaming, there's a lot happening in Malaysia with that right now. Malaysia, Singapore, they're using a lot of AI to imagine Muslim futures, Muslim mosques, and they're building that, and they're incorporating that very much into their religious practices and into their like imaginaries. But in the Netherlands, I would say, in terms of anecdotes, I would have to think a second, just because so much of it is quite serious stuff and quite like intense stuff. I think the best examples or concrete examples that I could give would be very much in terms of imagining, with ethics being one of the markers, right, one of the prime identifiers, people find it very important to be socially activist. So now you see that, especially with a lot of the younger ones that are joining these groups, climate change is quite the important theme, especially amongst those of like Gen Z and everything, them growing up. So you can tell that they spend a lot of effort into incorporating, you know, sustainable practices in their everyday life, and really look at that as a moral obligation coming from their religious disposition. So I sadly can't say, you know, it was this or that, but just a more, you know, a broader picture to do things more intentionally, and that being argued from, you know, the positionality of being a Muslim, rather than asking, are Nike shoes haram or halal, or asking whether you can wear nail polish or not. These questions they put to the side and are more interested in asking, what am I going to leave behind for my children's children when I'm going to leave the earth? So.
Thank you so much. I just look at you. You wanted to add something, Anya, before I... Okay. Okay, I will soon open the floor for possible questions or comments from you who are here with us today. But before that, maybe the question of, there is this this idea of, or the vision of having kind of a Muslim futurism movement in Europe, and we maybe in some years we look back and say, hey, you remember Republica 2023? No, kind of. And I'm not daring to say European Muslim futurism, or maybe we have to play in Europe. Is it about the geographics? Is it beyond that? But to start with the idea, and maybe to discuss that idea, we already have an incredible, rich past, like a specific Muslim past in Europe, a present, obviously. So what are your thoughts on this, the possibility of a movement in Europe when it comes to Muslim futurism? How can that look like, and where can that lead us to? Maybe we dare to envision for a second also on this stage. No, I thought I just spoke, so... As you like, as you feel. Or...
Yeah, I think that when it comes to connecting the past to the present and eventually the future, a really important concept here, which usually, whenever it's dropped, people are either incredibly excited or incredibly pissed off, is the concept of decolonization. And I would really like to explain what I mean with that, because it's such a contested concept and there's many ideas circulating about what that precisely means. And I think that the work of particularly Gurminder Bamra, who is at Exeter University, I think, is absolutely excellent in cutting through all of these discussions and bringing us straight to the core of everything. And that is very much when she speaks about the concept of interconnectivity and connected histories. So quite often in decolonial spaces, there's this idea that you need to replace, right? That there is a lot of white thinking and there's a lot of white history that's very much dominating everything else and obliterates it. And in order to correct that, you almost need to do the same, but in reverse. Well, Bambra argues this is quite problematic, because what is important, more so than replacing, is to really give credit to where credit is due. So there's very much this idea, for instance, that the main pillars of Western modernization theories like the Enlightenment or the Reformation or the Renaissance are born in a complete vacuum of thought, that there is no interconnection, no intellectual exchange at all with any other form of civilization ever, and that it was completely invented solely and purely on the basis of indigenous European thinking. This is incredibly far from the actual intellectual historic truth. It is well known that thinkers like John Locke actually engaged with Native American thinkers and actually had a bookcase full of Islamic, Persian, what is now North African, what is now the Moorish or the Bosnian Empire, or the Bosnian, what is now Bosnia, thinkers from all these particular areas that have very much fostered concepts of dialogue. Rousseau, for instance, his famous book, Émile, is very much similar to a 12th century book by the Andalusian philosopher Ibn Tufayl, Hay ibn Yaqzan. This is something that, you can look up, and so forth. I can continue naming names, but I don't want to bore you. And I think, so what I would like to stress is when we're thinking about visions of a Muslim, European movement or anything of the sorts, it is something that very much also includes other non-Muslims and everyone else on the continent as well, right? And it is important to include the fact that histories are not, like Hegel argued, cyclical and periodical and one thing follows the other. They're actually very much interconnected, very fluid. We've always exchanged information with each other. We've always built upon each other's works and vice versa. And I think that is something that needs to be acknowledged. And I think that is very much at the core of decolonization practices. So that is what I would like to add to that.
Thank you so much. And I look to my right or to my left.
J'ai pas vraiment de réponse, mais peut-être j'ai une recommandation.
I really don't have a response to that, but I have a recommendation maybe.
En France, il y a une expression qui dit que si tu veux que des personnes se battent, fais-leur parler de religion ou de politique.
In France, we say if you want that people have problems with each other and have a real discussion, just tell them about politics and religion.
Et moi, j'aurais rajouté du futur.
And me, I would like to add to that, and also let them speak about the future.
C'est très difficile d'être d'accord sur le futur. C'est presque impossible.
It is very difficult and nearly impossible to imagine the future and to speak about the future.
Ça veut dire qu'avant de pouvoir penser le musulman futur, je vais devoir designer un environnement qui permet de dépasser les oppositions. Sinon, on ne va pas finir.
This means that if I really want to speak about the Muslim futurism, I need to sit there and make a plan of a whole ecosystem, and then I can speak about it.
Une fois, j'ai dit à mon ami, et si on allait prier dans le métavers?
Once I said to my friend, and what happens if we go pray in a metaverse?
Mais t'es fou quoi? T'es fou?
Are you crazy?
C'est pas bien, c'est quoi
This
ça?
is not good.
C'est pas la religion ça.
This is not religion.
C'est pas la. Voilà, bon, c'est pour vous donner des exemples de ce qu'on va devoir dépasser.
It's actually an example to let you imagine how it's going to look like.
Thank you. Yeah. Now I'm thinking of praying in the metaverse. Maybe we should do that later. But yeah, Anja.
I really don't have much to say. I think everything has been said that I was having in mind as well. I think I can really relate to what Sarah just said, because it's so important to understand nothing is supposed to be replaced. This is a collective process, a global process, because the future is for everyone who's going to exist in it, and that's exactly how we have to approach it. But that also means that Muslim perspectives are not to be silenced or not to be just erased, as much as other marginalized voices in our current politics and in our current world are not to be marginalized. And I think this is like the main mission, that we collectively work on this, to unlearn a lot of the things that we have learned and to learn together to create these kind of futures where everyone feels they have a place and they're safe. And I think I would leave it to that and give back to you.
Thank you so much. We have beautiful 9 minutes to open it for your questions or comments. And if you have something you would like to add, that there are the microphones. Also, if you feel more comfortable in German, feel free to do so. We can translate it. Yeah, bitte. Feiruz, right? I think you have to come here. Yeah.
So you've already touched upon that this is a collective issue. But whenever I talk to my friends, my German friends, about my experience as a BIPOC, as a Muslim, it's always this, oh, I didn't know this. And then it's like, that's it. That's pretty much it. But how do you, in your work, engage people who are not from the Muslim community, for instance, to be exactly as enthused about this? Because it is a collective issue. It's not just about Muslims. And unfortunately also a lot of people think just the same, as you said, we're not replacing anything, just as people think that feminism is just about women's rights and not about men. It's the same thing, and that's why either people reject it or people are like, that doesn't concern me, so I'm just gonna stay out of it. And those are exactly the people who can actually do the most. So how do you concretely engage that in your work?
Thank you so much for the beautiful question. And whoever feels like answering it.
Like, it's such a difficult question and such a relevant question, to be honest, but that is exactly where the collective process starts. That we all feel that this is like equally relevant to our realities and not just like, oh, that's your problem, not on my problems, you know? Because as much as we talk about like Muslim futures or like Muslim perspectives, we have to do our homework and also like see what kind of perspectives we might miss in our everyday life and like literally unlearn and learn a lot of things that we do not know because they do not like directly affect us in our everyday life. I think that is where the process starts, and it's incredibly hard. I don't think that I have a solution currently. It's just engage and like be open and hold space. It's important. It's really hard and it's really difficult and sometimes it's painful, but we just kind of have to hold space for people to learn but it's going to be on them to actually do the work. Like, we cannot do the work for anyone and nobody can do the work for us. So this kind of opens like a completely like new thing for me, because this is like this thing about individualism, right? That is like really problematic, that everyone just looks at what affects them personally, what affects their bank account, and that is what they're going to talk about or fight for. And everything else doesn't really matter. And ideally, from a Muslim perspective and from what I like consider a Muslim philosophy or value, is that this thinking does not actually work because we exist here together. It's a whole coexistence. That means your problem is my problem too, and we're all only like gonna be liberated if every one of us is liberated, and we're all gonna be safe if every one of us is safe, and not only when I am safe. So, but yeah, thank you so much for that question.
Quand j'ai commencé les premiers ateliers avec des jeunes de 15 à 18 ans,
when I started my first workshops with youth from 15 to 18 years old,
j'ai pris un tableau blanc.
I took a whiteboard.
Et j'ai dit, venons, j'ai fait l'activiste, ouais, venons penser le futur, c'est important, etc.
And I was a kind of activist. I said, yeah, let's imagine the future, and what are your ideas?
Le tableau est resté blanc.
The whiteboard was white. Nothing changed on it.
Et puis un jour, j'ai découvert quelque chose.
One day I discovered something.
Un langage commun
A
qui
common
permet
language
d'engager tout le monde.
that actually makes it possible to engage everyone, to include everyone.
Ce langage commun, il est tellement évident qu'on a oublié que c'est un langage commun.
This common language was actually a language where they forgot that it's a new one, but
Donc,
it was a new
J'ai
language.
fait un autre atelier
So I did another workshop,
et j'ai dit, et si vous étiez dans Naruto dans le futur?
and there I had another question. What would it be? What would it look like if you would be Naruto from the future?
Quand j'ai dit ça, tout le monde a parlé.
When I had this question, everyone had an answer to it and
Donc,
something to add.
ce langage commun, c'est la pop culture.
And this common language is the pop culture.
Et il est très critiquable, bien sûr.
It's very criticable.
Mais si je parle à des jeunes de France, d'Allemagne, d'Italie, de Naruto, leurs yeux, ils vont se... Ah, Naruto...
But when I speak speak with German or Italian, Spanish youth, when I speak about Naruto, everyone opens its eyes and can talk about it, actually.
Et tout d'un coup, tu peux engager tout le monde.
And in a second, you can speak to everyone.
It's beautiful. I would like to experiment maybe on another day, but then with a crowd like this, what would be the common thing here? Maybe it's also anime or maybe something else. If there is another question, we have 3 minutes, but I would love to open the possibility. Please raise your hand if there is one. Is there a hand? Okay. Do you like to come? I think you have to come to the front. And then maybe we just have one person or one sentence as an answer.
Talking about the inter-Muslim debate, what would you say are the biggest rifts when talking about the future or a Muslim future?
I think I didn't hear it.
Oh, sorry. What would you say when talking about the Muslim future in the inter-Muslim dialogue? What are the biggest rifts? Are there any rifts? Like, is there a certain point where you say we are totally opposed on this point? Are there a certain point where you say these are very, very hot discussed topics?
I think, just very briefly, I think one of the main points within intra-Muslim debate is very much the idea of being able to disagree with each other on futures or on ideas about futures or on ideas about the faith, right? Islam traditionally has very much been characterized by institutionalized disagreement, very much by domesticating ambiguity, by having several ideas subscribe to the same thing, that is Islam, and being more or less comfortable with that. That is one of the biggest problems that is evident within many Islamic communities today, the fact that this tenet has been pretty much erased and that there are particular groups that are claiming a monopoly on truth, a monopoly on what it means to be Muslim or what Islam is, and are taking that to then colonize any form of any kind of future. So I think if there should be anything, it should be to open up just the debate. If you even want to discuss it, that's why I really agree with your points earlier about how important spaces are. I think just trying to create spaces where we can come together would already be indeed very radical.
Thank you so much. And I already see we have to come to an end, but to end also with the question from the other side, what I experience, what are similarities now, maybe also, or what are the common wishes or desires that come up when envisioning futures. It very much goes through sensuality and emotions in terms of it would be so beautiful to feel safe, seen, heard, loved, etc. in these possible futures, and of course to agree with what Zara said. And I think there's a long list of, and on both sides, what the similarities and also the most contested maybe issues are, which is on both sides, I think, really beautiful and really good that we have that and that we cultivate that. And to end it up, thank you so much for being here, for traveling. Thank you.
Um,